The first time Daniel stepped into Evelyn Moore's home, he felt something he couldn't explain, a mixture of peace and sadness. Like the air itself carried memories that hadn't been spoken aloud in years. The house was beautiful in a quiet, timeless way. There were tall windows dressed in soft cream curtains, shelves lined with old books that smelled faintly of cedar, and porcelain vases that looked as if they'd been bought decades ago. But what caught Daniel's attention most wasn't the beauty, it was the stillness. Everything seemed too perfect, too carefully placed, as though the woman who lived there had spent her life keeping something gently hidden behind the shine of elegance. Evelyn, his mother-in-law, stood by the fireplace that evening, wrapped in a silk shawl, pearls around her neck catching the warm light. She looked like someone born from a painting, graceful, distant, and yet somehow fragile beneath the calm. "Do you like it here?" she asked with a soft smile. Daniel nodded. "It feels peaceful." She smiled again, but there was something in her eyes that didn't match the smile, a kind of silence that had nothing to do with sound. That evening, as the clock ticked softly in the background, Daniel found himself watching her as she poured tea. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed, like she had learned long ago that grace was a kind of armor. He couldn't help wondering what her life had been like before he met her, before she became this quiet woman in pearls who seemed to live inside her memories. Claire, his wife, adored her mother. "She's always been strong," she often said. "After my father died, she held everything together. She never let the sadness touch her." But Daniel could sense that the sadness had touched her deeply. It was there in the way she looked out the window too long, in the way she hesitated before laughing, and in the way her eyes sometimes drifted toward the end of the hallway where the black door stood. It was a strange door, tall, painted in deep, polished black that reflected just enough light to feel alive. It didn't match the rest of the house, where every wall and window shone in shades of white and cream. The door felt out of place, like a shadow that refused to fade. Daniel had noticed it the first time he came to dinner. He thought maybe it led to a storage room or an unused guest space. But there was something about the way Evelyn never mentioned it that made it seem important. Once, out of curiosity, he'd asked Claire about it. "Oh, that," she'd said lightly. "It's been locked for as long as I can remember. Mom never talks about it." When he asked why, she only shrugged. "She says some memories deserve to stay where they are." That answer stayed with him, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. Over the next few months, Daniel found himself visiting Evelyn's home often, sometimes to help her with repairs, sometimes just for tea. She was kind to him, gentle and thoughtful, but there was always a distance. One afternoon, while rain softly tapped against the windows, Evelyn invited him to stay for dinner. Claire was running late from work, so it was just the two of them. The house was warm with the scent of soup and fresh bread. Evelyn sat across from him at the dining table, the soft glow of the chandelier above them. "Claire tells me you're writing again," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I haven't written anything good lately. Writers always say that," she replied with a knowing smile. "But sometimes silence is part of the story." Her words struck him, simple yet strangely wise. There was a depth in them that made him feel seen in a way few people ever had. After dinner, as Evelyn tidied the table, Daniel wandered to the hallway. The black door caught his eye again. In the reflection of its glossy surface, he saw himself, but behind his own reflection, something flickered. A faint light, a movement. He blinked, but when he looked again, it was gone. "Daniel." Evelyn's voice came from behind him, gentle but firm. He turned quickly. I thought I saw something." She gave a soft, almost wistful smile. "The house remembers things, that's all." Then, before he could ask anything else, she walked past him, touching his arm lightly. "Come," she said. "Let's have dessert before the rain stops." That night, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd said the house remembers things. He lay awake beside Claire, listening to the storm fading outside, wondering what kind of memories could live inside a locked door. In the days that followed, he tried to ignore his curiosity, but the image of that black door lingered in his mind, the way it seemed to absorb light, the way Evelyn's expression changed whenever it was mentioned, and as he thought of her, elegant woman with sad eyes and perfect manners, he began to feel something unexpected. Not attraction, but a deep sympathy, a quiet longing to understand what had built those walls around her heart. Evelyn Moore wasn't a mystery he wanted to solve. She was a story he wanted to understand. And behind that black door, Daniel felt certain, was the chapter she had never allowed anyone to read. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving Evelyn's garden wrapped in silver mist. Dew clung to the rose petals, and the faint scent of lilac drifted through the open kitchen window. Daniel stood by the counter, sipping coffee while Evelyn moved gracefully around the stove. She cooked like someone who believed in quiet care, slow, thoughtful, never rushed. Every motion felt deliberate, as though the act of preparing a meal carried a meaning far deeper than simple routine. "I never get tired of mornings here," Daniel said softly. "It feels like the world slows down." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's what I like about this house. Time listens here. It doesn't hurry like it does outside." There was that same calm, steady voice again, the kind that carried both warmth and sorrow. He watched her for a moment, wondering how many mornings like this she had spent alone, waiting for something that no longer came. Later that day, while Claire was at work, Daniel helped Evelyn move old boxes from the attic. The air was thick with dust and faint perfume, a scent that felt like memory itself. Among the boxes, he noticed a stack of photo albums neatly tied with ribbon. "Are these yours?" he asked. Evelyn paused before answering. "Yes, they belong to my younger years." She smiled softly, when the world still felt like a promise. They carried the boxes downstairs, and Evelyn set one of them on the dining table. "You can look through them if you'd like," she said. "Just be gentle. The pages are older than you." Daniel chuckled, sitting down as she poured tea. When he opened the first album, the smell of aged paper and lavender filled the air. The photos were black and white, small squares of frozen laughter and sunlight. There was Evelyn, barely 20, standing beside a tall man in a suit. The way they looked at each other, it wasn't just affection. It was the kind of love that glowed even in J.R.A. Skla. Daniel turned to her. "You look happy here." Her eyes softened. "I was. That was before life took a turn I didn't expect." "Is that your husband?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, that was before him. His name was Thomas. He was a musician. He used to play the piano right here in this house before it became so quiet." Her voice carried a fragile calm, as though each word touched something delicate in her memory. Daniel didn't ask more. Some silences, he thought, were sacred. The afternoon sunlight stretched through the windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. Evelyn stood beside the black door, her hand brushing against it unconsciously. "He wrote music," she said softly, "for every season. For every feeling. He said love should have a sound." Daniel glanced toward the door. "And that's where the piano is." She nodded, her expression distant. "Yes, but I haven't opened it in years. Some memories stay clearer when you don't touch them." Her words lingered in the air, gentle and full of longing. Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself spending more time at Evelyn's home. Sometimes he'd help her fix small things: the broken clock, the squeaky stair, the garden gate that refused to close. Other times, they'd just sit on the porch, sipping tea while the sun set over the fields. He started to notice the little things. The way she hummed under her breath while trimming roses. The way her fingers traced the rim of her teacup when she was lost in thought. She never said much about her past, but her eyes told stories that words COULDN. Single quotes to one afternoon. While they were sorting through more old boxes, Daniel found a small sheet of music folded between two books. On the top corner, in faded ink, were the words 4E. "Was this written for you?" he asked gently. Evelyn looked at the page as if seeing it for the first time in years. "Yes," she whispered. "He used to play it every evening when the light turned gold. It was our song." She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile that carried both joy and loss. Daniel could almost hear the melody in his mind. It wasn't just a song. It was a memory, said two notes, one that had outlived the man who wrote it, as days turned into weeks. Daniel began to realize something quiet was changing between them. It wasn't love, not the kind that crosses lines or seeks to be returned, but something softer, a deep human understanding. A bridge built from shared loneliness. Evelyn had lost a love too early. Daniel, though married to her daughter, sometimes felt unseen, his own creative soul quietly fading beneath the weight of daily life. When they spoke, it wasn't about the present, but about the things they both missed, moments of warmth, music and meaning that had slipped away too soon. It was never inappropriate, never crossed boundaries, but it filled something in both of them, a need too. It had been nearly 2 months since Daniel found the old sheet of music. Evelyn never brought it up again, but Daniel could tell that something inside her had quietly awakened. Her steps seemed lighter, her voice softer, and once in a while, he would catch her standing by the window, looking out with an expression that was no longer just sad. It was thoughtful, alive. Autumn had begun to settle in, painting this small town in shades of gold and amber. The air carried the scent of falling leaves and wood smoke, and the days grew shorter, folding gently into the kind of evenings that invited reflection. One Saturday morning, Daniel and Claire drove to Evelyn's to help prepare for the annual neighborhood gathering, a small outdoor event she hosted every fall. She called it the Evening of Warm Lights. It was a tradition she had kept since before Claire was born. By the time they arrived, the front yard was already filled with the soft hum of activity. Candles in glass jars lined the walkway, and strings of lights hung from the maple trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Evelyn stood at the center, arranging flowers on a long wooden table. "Daniel, dear," she said warmly, "would you mind helping with the lanterns? The cords are too tangled for my patience today." He smiled. "Of course, I'm good at untangling things." She looked at him with a quiet, knowing glance. "Yes," she said softly, "I believe you are." As the evening settled in, neighbors gathered, laughter echoing across the garden. Music played softly, cheerful, easy tunes from a local guitarist. Evelyn moved among the guests with her graceful composure, but Daniel noticed something different in her tonight. Beneath her polished charm, there was a flicker of restlessness, like someone standing at the edge of a memory. Later, as the crowd thinned and twilight deepened, Evelyn slipped away from the garden. Daniel saw her walking toward the house and, without quite knowing why, followed a few steps behind. Through the half-open door, he found her standing at the piano, the same black door now unlocked for the first time. A single candle burned on the piano's edge. Dust floated through the golden light like tiny fragments of time. "I wasn't sure anyone noticed I left," Shay said softly when she turned and saw him. "I saw the door open," Daniel replied. "I didn't know you'd decided to remember." She finished gently. "Yes, I suppose it was time." She sat down on the piano bench, her fingers hovering just above the keys. For a long moment she didn't play. She simply stared at the worn ivory surface, as though she could still see the hands that once touched them. Then, slowly, she pressed a key. One note, then another. The melody was uneven at first, but as she played, began to find its shape. The same tune Daniel had seen written on that old sheet of music. He stood in the doorway, frozen. The room seemed to breathe again. When she finished, Evelyn turned to him with eyes that shimmered in the candlelight. "It's strange," she whispered. "The song feels different when you play it for the living instead of the lost." That night, after everyone had gone home, Daniel stayed behind to help clean up. Clara had left early, exhausted from the long day. As they gathered empty cups and folded tablecloths, Evelyn spoke again. "You know," she said quietly, "Thomas and I wrote that song together. He used to say, 'Music is a promise. Even when people break, melodies keep them whole.'" Daniel listened, unsure what to say. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You remind me of that promise, Daniel. You listen to people as if you can hear the music beneath their words. Her words landed softly, but deeply. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just his wife's mother, but a woman who had carried decades of love and loss with quiet strength. He felt an ache, not of romance, but of recognition to souls who understood loneliness too well. "I think you kept that promise," he said gently. "You built a life around kindness, even after heartbreak." She looked away, blinking slowly. "Kindness can hide sorrow, Daniel. But sometimes sorrow teaches us how to love better." The next morning, Daniel returned to the house to drop off a forgotten box. Evelyn was in the garden again, trimming the last of the roses. A light breeze brushed through her silver hair, and for a moment, she looked decades younger. "I wanted to thank you," she said as he approached, "for last night." "For listening, always," he replied. She gave a small nod, then looked toward the piano room. "I'm thinking of opening it again. The door. Maybe it's time for music to fill this house once more." Daniel smiled. "I think Thomas would like that." Evelyn met his gaze, a tear glistening before she quickly brushed it away. "I think he would too." They stood there for a while, surrounded by falling leaves and quiet wind. Nothing needed to be said. The world around them seemed softer somehow, like grief itself had exhaled. That evening, Daniel drove home alone. Claire had stayed behind to help her mother sort through old keepsakes. As he drove through the fading light, he couldn't shake the image of Evelyn at the piano, the music, the candle, the peace that had returned to her eyes. He realized then that some connections aren't built from the desire to hold someone, but from the need to understand them. Evelyn had found healing in being seen, and somehow, so had he. Behind that black door, a secret had not only been revealed, but released. It wasn't a story of scandal or betrayal, but of love enduring quietly across time, the kind of love that teaches rather than takes, that remembers without reaching back. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, the melody he heard that night would stay with him for the rest of his life. A reminder that the heart doesn't forget. It simply learns new ways to sing. The following week, Daniel returned to Evelyn's house under the soft light of a cloudy afternoon. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of rain-soaked leaves. When she opened the door, her usual smile was there, calm, poised, but behind it, Daniel sensed something unsettled. "Claire told me you've been sorting through old things," said gently as he stepped inside. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, it's strange, letting the past breathe again. You think time has made you strong, and then a photograph reminds you that strength is just a quieter kind of weakness." She led him to the living room, where boxes of letters and photo frames were spread across the rug. Each piece seemed to hum with history. There was a quiet reverence to the space, as if time itself had paused to listen. Daniel helped her gather a few of the albums. As he handed her one, his gaze caught the edge of a photograph. The same young Evelyn, standing beside the man named Thomas, both smiling at something just beyond the frame. "He looks kind," Daniel said softly. "He was," she replied, her eyes distant. "He had a way of making silence feel safe. That's a rare thing, Daniel, finding someone you don't have to perform for." Her words struck him deeply. He knew exactly what she meant. They sat together in quiet companionship, sorting through years that neither of them had lived, but both could somehow feel. Outside, a gentle drizzle began to fall, tapping softly against the windows, the kind of rain that didn't demand shelter but invited reflection. After a while, Evelyn spoke again. "When Thomas died, I stopped playing the piano. I told myself it was because of the grief, but truthfully, I think I was afraid. Afraid that if I played, he'd feel too close and then too far all over again." Daniel listened, his heart tightening. "I understand that," he said. "When I lost my father, I stopped writing for the same reason. It felt like keeping quiet was the only way to hold on to what I'd lost." Evelyn looked at him with quiet empathy. "It's strange, isn't it? How silence becomes our way of remembering." He nodded. "And sometimes it becomes the way we forget." Their eyes met for a brief moment, not in longing, not in defiance, but in recognition. Two people from different worlds bound by the same unspoken ache, the need to be understood. Later that evening, the rain stopped, leaving a faint mist curling over the garden. Evelyn lit a few candles around the room and made tea. The light danced across her face, softening the lines of age, revealing a glimpse of the woman she once was, young, hopeful, unguarded. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Daniel asked quietly. Evelyn smiled, though her eyes shimmered. "Oh, often. But I've learned that wishing backward doesn't change the past. It only steals peace from the present." She paused, her hands gently wrapped around her teacup. "Still," she added after a moment, "there are words I never said. Things I wanted to tell him before he left this world. But I was too proud, too afraid of what honesty might take away." Daniel's voice was almost a whisper. "What would you have told him?" She thought for a long moment before replying. "That love doesn't have to be loud to be real. That even in silence it can still be felt. I would have told him that he changed me and that I never stopped hearing his music." The simplicity of her words filled the room with quiet emotion. "You know," she said after a while, looking toward the piano room, "when you first came here with Claire, you reminded me of him. Not because of how you look or speak, but because you see things most people overlook. You notice the small, tender details of life. That's rare." Daniel lowered his eyes. "Maybe that's why I couldn't stop thinking about that black door. It felt like something important was waiting behind it." Evelyn nodded. "You were right. Behind that door was a life I couldn't let go of and a love I couldn't speak of. For years, I thought locking it away would protect me. But all it did was keep me half alive." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, but she didn't hide it. The first frost of winter had arrived, painting frost patterns across the windows and crisping the air outside Evelyn's home. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and warm tea, gay sanctuary from the cold dot. Daniel had come to visit, helping Claire carry a few packages from the car. Evelyn met them at the door, her shawl wrapped carefully around her shoulders, pearls glinting in the soft light. There was something different in her expression today, a mix of calm and determination that made Daniel pause for a heartbeat. "I've been thinking," she said as they stepped inside, "about the piano room." Daniel set the packages down. "Yes, I think it's time to open it completely," she replied. "Not just for memories, but for truth, for closure." Her words caught him off guard. There was a gravity in them, a weight that made the room feel still. Daniel nodded quietly. He had sensed for weeks that Evelyn's heart was preparing for something she had held back for decades. Later, after Claire had gone upstairs to rest, Evelyn led Daniel down the hallway to the black door. The candlelight flickered, casting soft shadows across the walls. Evelyn took a deep breath and placed her hand on the polished doorknob. "Thomas's story isn't just a memory," she said softly. "It's a part of me, and for too long I've hidden it." Daniel didn't speak, only nodded. He had learned that sometimes silence was the greatest kindness you could offer. She opened the door. The piano sat waiting, draped in a thin layer of dust. Sheet music was scattered on the floor, illuminated by the glow of the candlelight. Evelyn walked over and touched the keys lightly. They produced a soft, hesitant note that seemed to vibrate with the echoes of the past. "I never told anyone," she began, her voice trembling just slightly, "why I kept this door closed. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if I faced it, I would lose myself in the memory of him." Daniel watched her quietly, feeling the weight of years of unspoken truth settle over the room. "Thomas and I were young," she continued. "We loved freely, without hesitation. The world around us was uncertain, but in our music, we found certainty. We promised each other we would always return to this house, to this piano. But life has a way of changing plans." She paused, glancing at Daniel. "He passed away before we could fulfill that promise, and I didn't know how to live with the emptiness." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The sorrow in her voice was not bitterness, not anger, but pure, aching loss. He wanted to reach out, to say something, but he waited, Kay allowing her to continue. For years, I hid from the memory, she said, her eyes tracing the edges of the piano. I locked the door thinking I could protect myself. But the truth is, the memory never left me. Every note I wrote, every quiet moment I spent alone, he was there. A silence followed, filled with understanding rather than words. Daniel finally spoke, his voice gentle. You've carried him with you, even in the silence. That's not weakness. That's love. Evelyn looked up, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Love doesn't vanish, Daniel. It doesn't fade. It waits, quietly until you're ready to face it. Then, almost unconsciously, Evelyn sat at the piano and began to play. The notes were hesitant at first, but then they found their rhythm, the melody she had kept in her heart for decades. Daniel stood silently by the doorway, letting the music fill the space between them. Each note seemed to carry both heartbreak and healing. When she finished, Evelyn turned to him. I've been afraid of remembering because remembering feels like opening a wound. But standing here, playing for the first time in years, it feels like forgiveness. Daniel stepped closer. Not just forgiveness for him, he said softly, but for yourself. You've been carrying this alone for too long. She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. I needed someone to see it with me, to witness the story without judgment, to understand that it wasn't a mistake to love so deeply. Daniel smiled faintly. It wasn't a mistake. It was beautiful. Her gaze held his for a long moment, full of gratitude and quiet emotion. It was a connection born not from romance or desire, but from the shared understanding of loss, longing, and the courage to finally speak one's truth. For the first time in years, Evelyn looked unburdened. The black door, once a symbol of secrecy and sorrow, now stood open, letting light, air, and memory coexist. Thank you, Daniel, she said finally, for being here, for listening, for allowing me to face this. He smiled. You didn't need to thank me. You deserved to be heard. Outside, the frost glistened in the moonlight, and inside, the piano room felt alive again, not with the past, but with acceptance, with hope, with the beauty of truth finally spoken. Daniel realized then that some turning points aren't about dramatic confessions or life-changing events. Sometimes they are quiet moments of honesty, courage, and shared understanding. N for Evelyn. This was her turning point, the moment she let the melody of her past harmonize with the life she had built. Embracing both loss and love in the same breath, winter had settled softly over the small town, frosting the rooftops and turning the bare branches of the trees into delicate white sculptures. Evelyn's garden lay quiet beneath the early morning sun, the roses tucked into their winter coats, the pathways lined with a light dusting of snow. Inside the house, the black door, once a symbol of silence and hidden memories, now stood open, a gentle invitation rather than a barrier. Daniel had stopped by that morning to help Claire carry in groceries, and Evelyn had greeted them with the same serene smile she always wore. But today, there was a lightness in her step, an unmistakable sense of peace that hadn't been there before. Good morning, Shay said, her voice calm and steady, yet warm. Would you like some tea? Of course, he replied. He placed the bags on the counter and watched her move through the kitchen with grace, noticing how naturally she carried herself, how the quiet strength in her presence seemed renewed after breakfast. Evelyn suggested they spend some time in the piano room. Daniel followed, feeling a quiet anticipation. The room was brighter than he remembered, sunlight spilling across the floor, illuminating the scattered sheet music and polished keys. Evelyn approached the piano and lifted her hands to play. This time she didn't hesitate. The melody flowed smoothly, carrying with it the years of memory loss and finally acceptance. Daniel watched as her fingers danced over the keys, seeing not just the notes, but the emotion behind them, the decades of love and longing that had been kept locked away. When she finished, Evelyn turned toward him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and quiet joy. It feels right, she said softly, to finally let it live again. Not just in memory, but in the present. Daniel nodded. It's beautiful, Evelyn. You've carried something precious all these years, and now it has space to breathe. And I'm glad I could witness it with you. Her smile deepened, and for the first time, Daniel saw her truly at peace. A woman who had faced the echoes of her past and allowed them to harmonize with the life she had built in the days that followed. The black door remained open. Evelyn played the piano more often, each note a quiet reminder of Thomas, of the love she had carried, and of the strength she had found in living fully despite loss. The house, once heavy with silent memories, now seemed alive. Its warmth was no longer just physical but emotional, a reflection of a heart unburdened and free. Claire noticed the change immediately. She smiled at her mother one evening as they sat by the fire. "Mom, you seem happier," she said. "Like a weight has lifted." Evelyn nodded. "It has. I realized that keeping the past locked away didn't honor it. Facing it, letting it be seen, letting it be felt, that's what truly honors love." Daniel, too, felt the difference. There was a serenity in Evelyn's presence now that made the house feel like a sanctuary for everyone who entered. And in that calm, he realized something important. Some bonds are not about possession or control, but about witnessing and understanding. Winter turned slowly toward spring. Snow melted into soft rains. Crocuses and daffodils began to bloom, and the sunlight grew warmer. The black door remained open, a quiet testament to healing and memory. Evelyn had even begun inviting the neighborhood children to play the piano, letting the music fill the house in new ways. One afternoon, as Daniel and Claire visited, Evelyn sat by the piano, guiding a small group of children through a simple melody. She laughed softly at their mistakes, her voice gentle and full of life. Daniel watched, feeling a deep respect for her, a woman who had loved, lost, and ultimately learned to transform grief into something living, tangible, and beautiful. When the children left, Evelyn turned to Daniel and Claire. "Life is made of moments like this," she said. "Small, imperfect, fleeting, but real. The past doesn't have to hold us back. It can guide us, remind us, and sometimes even bring us joy again." Daniel smiled. "You've shown that beautifully, Evelyn." She glanced toward the black door one last time, her hand resting lightly on the frame. "Yes," she said softly. "It's no longer a door to hide behind. It's a door to remember, to honor, and to live." That evening, Daniel drove home with Claire beside him. The streets were quiet, and the soft glow of streetlights reflected off wet pavement. He thought about Evelyn, about the courage it had taken to finally speak her truth, and about the quiet, enduring power of love that isn't about possession, but about remembrance. He realized, too, that some store,